David Chase.
Alan.
Good to see you, sir.
How are you?
How are you? Let's do this. I want to start with something you said to me literally the day after the Sopranos finale aired, because it's really interesting in the context of this movie. I asked, were you ever thinking about making a movie? And back then, you said you really couldn't envision it happening. And you said specifically, an idea could pop into my head where I would go, wow, that would make a great movie, but I doubt it. So I'm wondering at what point the idea popped into your head that made you go, okay, this is going to be a great movie.
In the second season of the show, I think, the Writers Guild arranged for me to be interviewed by Tom Fontana. I don't get it, but one writer interviews another. And during that interview, Tom said he thought it would be interesting to do a story in Newark, in the old days, about Johnny and Junior. And that appealed to me because my mother comes from Newark at that time. My parents met in Newark at that time. And so I used to go down to the Italian section of Newark with my mother. Every Saturday, she'd drag me down there while she shopped for Italian food, groceries and stuff. So, yeah, that kind of appealed to me. And I never forgot it. I was also always interested in the Newark riots. I had wanted to make in film school or right after, I wanted to make a movie about 4 guys who avoid the draft by joining the reserves. Yeah. And they get sent in a tank into the Newark riots, and it changes their life. But I never did it. But anyway, all those things sort of combined into an interest in Newark for me. I felt I had some esprit of the place or something. What really happened was Toby Emmerich, who was the head of New Line at the time, from the very beginning, in the early 2000s, kept pursuing me to do a Sopranos movie. And then finally, he was head of Warner Brothers, and I had done something that I had done a miniseries script for HBO, which they wanted to do, but on a cheesy budget. And I refused to do that, and I turned that down. And so this came along, and I thought, okay, that was it.
You're very protective of the legacy of the show. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
All right. So, because people have asked me since this was announced, well, why is he doing this? And my response has always been, David cares about the show. He wouldn't do it if he didn't think it was a good idea.
Absolutely. The idea of prequel never entered my head. But then I remembered what Tom said, and then that made me think of the young Junior and the young Johnny, and that's absolutely true. No, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, in that same conversation back after the finale, you've specifically said many of your favorite moments on the show were either depicting the good old days or just people talking about the good old days,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when Tony was a kid.
Right.
So what beyond your own sort of experience in your family, what about that period appealed to you?
Well, it was before the RICO statutes. And it was when mobsters used to dress well.
Yeah. Before
tracksuits and all that. And I guess that was maybe the highlight of the mob in those days. Before drugs or before RICO statutes.
Yeah, I mean, Tony in the first episode says, I came in at the end, and now
right.
Now you're in the glory days. So
right.
How different was it writing about the glory days versus sort of the pathetic scraps that Tony and his guys had to live on?
Well, we didn't go as far. We didn't have as much time. It wasn't really that different. Just, in my view, a little bit less profanity. I figured, as I recall those days, not my age, when I was 18, in the beginning of the 60s, everything was fuck. But I think people of that older generation didn't use that much profanity. It's very simple.
Dickie Moltisanti is mentioned a few times on the show. There's one episode in particular at the start of season 4 where Christopher is told, like, this is the man who killed your father.
Yeah.
So why did Dickie become the way into this period for you, for this script?
I was always interested in who was this guy, Dickie Moltisanti, that we wrote about. I had interest in him as a character and Christopher's father and the whole story, that Christopher had a father, and I was interested in Christopher to begin with. When Larry and I sat down and started to write, we said that we wanted to have it be about a dynamic character. We had to get another Tony, somewhat. And out of the history of the show came Dickie, a mean, tough guy.
And he's also a mystery. Like, we know a lot about Livia. We know a fair amount about Johnny. We know something about Junior. You could sort of do anything you wanted with this Sticky Moltisanti character.
We went to Mickey Rooney first, but he turned us down.
So it came time to cast this role, this very important role. What about Alessandro said to you? All right, this is my guy who can be my, as you said, new Tony.
I just remembered Alessandro from American Hustle and the one I can never remember the name of about the oil business. And I always thought he was great. I thought, and he's Italian. I thought, where's this guy been? Why doesn't he get jobs? And I decided to get him a job.
You also have to cast a lot of these roles that we've already seen on the show, sometimes really famously. You've told me the story about how Nancy Marchand was the only person who could have possibly played Livia.
Absolutely.
All right, so now you've got to go find a new Livia. Why Vera?
There was never any question. That's the honest truth. Somebody said, Vera Farmiga, and we all said, yeah. And that was that.
Now, there have been, I don't want to say urban legends because Ray himself has said it, but like Ray Liotta has talked in the past about how he was approached to be on the show and was never explicitly said what part it was. Some people have speculated Tony, some people have speculated Ralphie. Did you ever actually reach out to Ray to be on
I did.
Sopranos?
I took a train trip all the way down to Richmond, Virginia to talk to him to play Ralphie, I believe it was. And he passed.
But he was never a consideration to be Tony Soprano.
No.
Okay.
No. He would have been if I had thought that he would do it, but at that point I thought he won't do a TV show.
So, I mean, how does it feel to finally, I don't know if he's your white whale, but to finally get Ray in a Sopranos story after all this time?
Great. It's great. And to watch him work and to have him be there and what he does is so fantastic. I mean, I've always been a Ray Liotta fan. I was mesmerized by him in Something Wild, yeah. I remember that turn in the last act when all of a sudden he starts kicking the shower door down. I thought, ooh, boy, that guy is dangerous.
Some of what he does in this movie, there's a stillness to it that I'm not sure I've seen him do quite that before. It's very arresting. He's terrific in it.
Good. I hope he feels that way. I think that's probably why he wanted to do it, was the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. When did you first start thinking about the idea of having Michael Gandolfini play the teenage Tony?
Right away. Yeah.
Why?
Gee. Well, he looks like his father. He is his father's son, mostly because he looked like him and moves a little bit like him. I thought, so for a movie, it's supposed to be the same character. That would be the best. Although I don't think we started with him. I think we read other kids. When it hit, it really hit like, oh yeah, that's the way to go.
Yeah, I spoke to him, and he said initially when his manager told him that there was interest in this, his response was, and I quote, "Fuck no!" Like he wanted no part of sort of stepping into this. Do you remember, like, what conversations did you have with him over the course between that and when he did
None.
it? None.
None. He came in, he read, and we hired him. I didn't talk to him, but I mean, I knew him. Denise and I had lunch with him when he first came out to California, which was probably, I don't know, a year before that. And actually, he seemed at that lunch, very soft. And we kind of stayed very loosely. I probably saw him twice in 2 years. Friends. He is a friend of Tim Van Patten's daughter. They're both actors.
Yeah.
So at Tim Van Patten's house, I'd see him occasionally.
He was a little kid. Like, he was born after the first season wrapped, and I think was 7 or 8 when the show ended. He remembered, like, his dad bringing him to Silver Cup, and he would nap in Tony and Carmela's bed. Do you remember him at all being around there at that time?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
What was he like as a kid?
I mean, he never acted up there. I mean, he probably was told to, settle down all the time there. But he had a great little kind of Tony-like face. And I recall that he was with Tony a couple of times, with Jim, when Jim called me Satan, vampire, all of that loving stuff.
When he started either at the table read or at the audition or whatever level, when he started really sort of capturing the essence of that character, because he really does, what did that feel like to you, having been there for Jim when he played that role for so long?
Well, it felt miraculous. Sometimes when things are miraculous or astounding, you start laughing because it's so incredible. But I remember looking across the room at the read-through, at the table, and he was sitting there like this, and it wasn't his scene. And he was I mean, I can't do it with his shoulders. He was doing this thing, and I thought, holy shit, that's incredible.
Yeah. He did the, when we were having lunch, he did the, what did you just say kind of face that Jim would do all the time. And I kind of had to push back in my chair. It's very...
He did it for real or to show you?
No, just basically I was asking like what sort of mannerisms he picked up from his dad that he tried to sprinkle into the performance.
Yeah. What did you just say?
In general, I mean, it's almost like actors playing historical figures with some of these characters, because the audience has an impression in their head of what Tony looks and sounds like, what Livia, Paulie, Silvio, et cetera, does. And yet you've got actors who you want to give performances that, that they're not just doing impressions. What did you want out of this cast, the people who were playing characters from the show?
It's very, very difficult and very difficult to say. I mean, I probably would have been content with impressions, but I would have known that was wrong. I probably would have gotten a kick out of it if it was really working, but I would have known that that's not what it should be. Whether I would have had the willpower to stop, I don't know.
Billy Magnuson said you actually got Tony Sirico to record the young Paulie Walnuts dialogue for him to listen to to sort of as a reference. Why did you do that?
I would say Paulie was the hardest one to get.
Why?
He's the most unusual. I mean, this is not disrespectful. The most cartoon-like. The way he talks, his gestures, all this stuff. Nobody can touch his hair, the stories. The way he bugs his eyes when he's surprised, and great expressions. It was sort of beyond doing.
Yeah.
It was sort of beyond doing.
How did Alan wind up directing the movie?
He did some of my favorite episodes of the show. And I was going to direct it originally. That was the intention.
Yes.
That was the intention during the making of the deal and everything. And that's why I wanted to do it. I'd get to direct it. But there were like simultaneous health crises in my family, so I couldn't do it.
This was always your dream, going back to when you made the pilot, was you wanted HBO to pass on it. You could turn it into a movie, take it to Cannes.
That's true, yeah.
So, and here finally you would get to make a Sopranos movie, but because of the family stuff, you couldn't direct it.
Right.
Was that bittersweet in any way?
Yeah. Yeah, it was bitter. It wasn't sweet at all.
Okay. So then you're on the set. I've spoken to a number of the actors, and they said, like, Alan, like, you were there and they could look to you for guidance, but mainly Alan was the director, the one in charge, in terms of like working with the actors. What did you guys, having worked with him on the show, how did you figure out like the division of labor?
We just sort of stumbled into it. Since he was the director, I would never have gone and talked to an actor without talking to him first.
Yeah.
Having directed, I really, to some people's dislike, I really felt that he should pick the crew, get the cameraman he wanted, get the editor he wanted, and that's what happened.
The riots, I'm from New Jersey. I know a lot about them, but there were so many riots in that period in America that the Newark ones have not achieved the infamy or notoriety of some of the others.
Right.
How much research did you do beyond your own life experience into what happened? Okay.
A lot, yeah. I mean, there's been documentaries made, there's books. Alan did a lot of research. I think more than I did. Or more than me and Larry did.
Because of COVID, the movie has been on a shelf for a little bit, and during that time, 2020 happened, and suddenly there was all this anti-police sentiment and protests throughout the country.
Yeah.
As you were watching the news, did it ever occur to you, like, we've made this thing that is now going to inadvertently reflect on what's happening in the country now?
I didn't think of it that way. What I thought was, here we go again, or, well, it's still going on. I didn't think. Later on, I started to think about the coincidental timing, but not while it was not while we were shooting.
Leslie Odom's character, Harold, is a bit of a different taste from what the show did. There were a few African-American characters, but they tended to appear briefly, were sort of viewed from the outside, massive genius, or the police officer that Charles Dutton played. Harold, we get to know he has an inner life. He has a number of scenes away from Dickie and the other members of the family. Why was that interesting to you to do in this story?
Well, I wanted the audience to feel that he was as important and he was as powerful a character as Dickie and the white gangsters. I wanted them to be more equal.
Did you go back and rewatch the show before you wrote the script?
No.
Okay.
No, I didn't.
There's a couple of scenes in the movie that are either recreating something that we saw on the show in one of the flashbacks or recreating something that a character described. And it's interesting, they're a little bit different than what we saw or what we heard the last time. And I'm curious if that was an intentional thing to show, like, that memory can be different.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was what I thought. I thought memories do change.
Yeah. Characters occasionally will say a line that the other actor said on the show, or there's nods to things. How comfortable were you with these Easter eggs and the amount of?
Oh, I like them. I got a kick out of them. I had to restrain myself. And I hope I did it enough.
The show had kind of a moment during the pandemic. It seemed to be, at least anecdotally, something everyone was watching.
I would say it was more than kind of a moment.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Well, it started happening before the pandemic, before COVID. Anywhere I went, I'd meet guys of an age, I don't know, in their 40s or early 50s, and they'd say, my kid just watches your show. I mean, he couldn't watch it when it was on. He was a little kid. But, I mean, him and his friends, that's all they do is watch your show. And I thought, oh, that's so great. I'm so glad to hear that. And I would hear it and hear it and hear it. And then when COVID came along, it, expanded. It burst open, and to the extent that journalists or whatever you want to call them, people like yourself, said it was the hit of COVID, or it was a miracle, and a lot of things like that. And it was a miracle. I mean, if you were me, it was just astonishing.
I mean, you've said, like, in the past, at least at times, you expected the show to be forgotten because it's just, the culture moves on, and obviously the culture went back to it.
I know. And this is before COVID, don't forget. So what is it about millennials and Gen Z people that they got into The Sopranos? I just don't know. What do you think?
I think to a degree they sort of see what Tony says to Melfi in that first session about coming in at the end, and they recognize the show was right. Like, all the things you had to say about the state of America, the state of the world, the state of the culture, and, how bad things were getting, I think they've, for the most part, been proven, unfortunately, to be correct.
I believe you're correct.
So, is it gratifying to you to know that the show has lived on to the degree that it has?
Of course, yes. Of course. And when you think about something like that, you prove to be correct, you hope that it's helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is. I mean, are people ever changed or really fundamentally moved by a TV show or a movie? I'm not sure.
From a more practical standpoint, the fact that so many people were either watching it for the first time or rewatching it kind of primes the pump for them to now see this movie.
Hopefully, yeah.
But have you thought much about, like, how it's going to play to people who have not seen the show versus to people who have?
Yeah, sure we did. That's been a concern from the beginning. And that's why I really need to stress that the studio has made a lot about the fact that this is a Tony Soprano origin story. It wasn't written that way. There is some of that in it. The Sopranos, we always did A, B, C, D stories in every episode. That was the challenge of it. That was what I think made it good, is that you you never got bored. When you got bored with the story or you're confused, you could move to something else. But the movie was not set up as a Tony Soprano origin story. It was a story about Dickie Moltisanti, and it still is. And it's a gangster movie. It's about gangsters in the late 60s, early 70s in New Jersey, both black and white.
Did the role of Tony expand at any point in the development process, though, especially when you did get Michael to play him?
No.
Okay. How is Soprano storytelling different in a movie context as opposed to a TV context, or is it?
Well, this is a question I ask myself all the time about the difference between making a movie and making a TV show, especially writing a movie, or writing a TV show. I mean, it is the same thing, but at the same time, if you don't do things that are against the conventional wisdom, like writing a movie, when you're writing a movie, you just get the same thing all the time. And people can say, well, it's too discursive. It goes here, it goes there. That's what I do. It would be and it is, a personal challenge for me and a personal artistic goal to not do that. I wouldn't do it for the audience. It's like, I don't know, people have blue periods, red periods. I would like to do something different. For example, I keep telling myself that next time, if I'm lucky enough and I do a movie, I won't do needle drops anymore. Now, is that true? Will that really turn out to be the case? I don't know. I'll use a composer. I don't know.
You love needle drops. You said that was your favorite part of making the
It
show.
that was my favorite part of making the show. And it was my favorite part of this movie, too.
Yeah.
But because I love it doesn't mean it's making the best art.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, though, because you've said that there are sort of two sort of competing soundtrack aesthetics on the show. There's the music Tony likes, and there's the music you like.
Yeah.
How would you describe the songs you wound up choosing for this?
They're both. Tony is shown to be fond of Mountain, the band Mountain. I really like the band Mountain. Most people, I don't think that many people know about the band Mountain. I mean, one of the guys in that band was the producer of the first two Cream albums. Now, which are more famous, Mountain or Cream? I'd say mostly I go with what I like. So, yeah. Yeah, not because I like it, but because I believe it's right for the moment in the movie, or it's from the future, but so what?
Due to the bizarre circumstances of the past 16 months in our lives and this day and date thing that Warner is doing this year, the movie will be premiering on HBO Max at the same time that it's in theaters. So
Isn't that wonderful?
Yep.
I consider that. What's that word from The Godfather? Infamia.
I've heard from a couple of people who worked on the movie that you were very insistent that you wanted it to come in under 2 hours. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why?
Just to keep the drive going. I find most movies nowadays too long.
Yeah.
Even with ones that I really like. I reach a point where I'm like, okay, let's get to the end. I mean, I'm not saying that, but that's what I'm feeling or thinking as a viewer. I can feel my energy start to go down. And I just didn't want that to happen.
I will say, like, I would have gladly watched a 2.5, 3 hour version of this just based on what is in those 2 hours.
In a way, I do believe in the old expression, less is more. I kind of do believe that.
Yeah.
Leave them wanting more, I believe in that. The only other movie I've made, I cut too much. Wasn't my idea, but I fell into that spell. I just feel that, or I'm told that contemporary audiences won't sit still for this, and they won't sit still for that. And I get rebellious against that. But this one, seeing as it's a real gangster movie, I thought should move along.
Yeah. You said before, and you've talked about this in the past, like not just wanting to give the audience what they want. This is a beloved show that has now had a resurgent moment. Now there's the movie coming out that's spinning out of it, featuring a number of characters from it. What are you hoping for the audience's response to it to be?
Well, I'm hoping that a lot of people are going to see it. I couldn't say anything more than that. I'm hoping that a lot of people go to see it. If they don't, they don't. You know, I would not do a lot of things so that people go. And and when I have had arguments with the studio about that, things that they want that I just don't want to do and won't do because it'll put butts in seats, as they say.
Arguments about this movie in particular?
This movie, yeah.
So what did they want that you didn't want to do?
I'm not going to go into that, but
Okay.
I'm just, we had different viewpoints. It's always going on with a movie or a TV show. It's unfortunate for Hollywood and for major studios that their business happens to contain an art form. And I have no sympathy. And if they wanted that not to be the case, they should have gone into the shoe business. I can't get there. I can't get there to compromise and cut things and do things that, it'll put more people will come, or they won't be offended.
You said if you're lucky enough to get to make another movie, would you be interested in making another movie set in this universe, or is this it for you?
I was not interested at all in doing another movie set in this universe. And then we did some additional shooting.
Yes.
Which I thought made the movie brought the movie much more to my heart. I've had some conversations with other writers that I've worked with who might be interested in doing it, and if one of those guys was going to do it, I might do it, But that's really not high on my list of what to do.
Okay.
My list of what to do is, I'm not getting any younger. I want to make another movie, hopefully, and it would not be this one.
Would you be comfortable with someone doing a Soprano story without you?
No. Well, it depends on the person.
Okay.
Terry Winter, yeah.
It's so strange to me and so wonderful that this world has come back to life. I never would have expected this for so long.
Right.
When you were on the set and they're filming scenes either with returning characters or with new characters, how did that feel to you?
I mean, there was a lot of things going through my mind. The fact that I hadn't directed it, someone else was directing it. I really wasn't thinking about The Sopranos at all. It was just making a movie about this guy, Dickie Moltisanti, and this kid, Tony Soprano, and it was like making any other movie. It's exciting and boring.
Yeah.
It's both.
Hurry up and wait.
Hurry up and wait, yeah.
Whose idea was it to sort of market it as The Many Saints of Newark, a Sopranos story?
That came up very quickly, very early on, the possibility that would happen. And then when we were doing the marketing, it didn't come up for a long time. And then it did. And by the time it did, I was so exhausted from so many arguments with them but I never expected the font to be that big. I always used to think about, a Spike Lee joint. So what can we put? Sopranos sells each? I don't. And we never did get around to thinking of something interesting. And it kind of was on there as a surprise to me. Yeah. And I didn't like it, but I couldn't go back and fight.
Yeah. Speaking of sausage, Alan Taylor told me that one of the things they got to do for the movie was put a ceiling in the pork store in the scenes at Satriales, which you couldn't do. Were there any other things like that where just having a movie budget allowed you to do things you couldn't have done on the show?
We could have done everything that we did, only not as big.
I'm trying to imagine what the TV version of the riot sequence would have looked like.
Well, there you go. I mean, we did do the riots.
Yes.
Show number 7 of the first season. But we didn't really see the rioters.
Yeah.
We heard a lot about them, but we mostly saw Johnny and Livia arguing and Tony confused. And the Rascals, the first time we ever saw the Rascals.
Johnny's a character who doesn't loom quite as large over the show as Livia does. There's definitely episodes and sessions with Melfi where he talks about her, but we only see him a few times. What do you find interesting about Johnny Boy Soprano back in the late 60s and early 70s?
Just that he was a man of his time. The Italian underworld was different than it is now. In fact, you don't hear much that right now, maybe because I'm living on the West Coast, but I don't think you hear much of it at all. When we were making the show, there was a lot of stuff about it in the 2000s. Vinny Ocean and all these guys, and No, you don't hear anything.
You used to say that Junior was often like the writer's favorite character to write
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
What, was that the case here as well?
I don't think so, because I don't know who the writer's favorite character was, but Junior was great as an old man. I mean, Corey is great, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Corey, it's the same character, and he does great stuff. But Junior, as an old fart, was really good.
The movie revisits Holston's.
Yeah,
Why did you want to go back there?
I didn't think it would be, but it was an important location for the series originally. There's a lot of mojo with that location, and we never even thought twice about it, that we would be there at some point.
Do you feel like what occurs in the movie at Holston's, do you think that that's going to change how anyone feels about the final scene of the show?
No, I don't.
During this period when the show had the resurgence and people were telling you about it, did the ending come up much?
No, it didn't. I mean, every time I'd read something about it, someone would say the controversial ending, or some people love it, some people hate it. Some of them would say people hated it and now they accept it or even understand it more. It was always mentioned in print in some little way.
Yeah.
I never heard it from people that I talked to.
Dickie, Tony refers to him as Uncle Dickie. They are not biologically uncle and nephew.
No.
Tony and Christopher were not biologically uncle and
Right.
nephew. He has an uncle who is often not treated as an uncle. What about that kind of relationship was interesting to you then, is interesting to you here in this film?
I don't know if it's an Italian-American specialty, or I think there's a lot of that used to go around, that people were called uncle when they weren't your uncle. A family friend, male family friend, who was around a lot was often called Uncle So-and-so.
Yeah.
What's a Dutch uncle, by the way?
I know the phrase, but I've never thought about what it means.
Right.
And obviously, that's this very strange thing where Tony murders his quote-unquote nephew. Tony's own uncle tried to kill him. These are not healthy relationships necessarily.
No. I mean, the show didn't specialize in healthy relationships.
There's also some conversations the characters have. You see young Tony with a guidance counselor at one point. You see sometimes Dickie conversing with a relative in a way that feels therapeutic, even though obviously nobody is in therapy at this stage of things.
Yes.
Was that dynamic sort of important for you?
Yes, it was.
Why?
It was intentional. It had worked the first time. It's really good, or maybe it's a sign of laziness, when a character can just tell you what they're thinking and feeling. Very often when I see that, there's too much of it around. And one thing I always prized about The Sopranos was that people did not tell you how they were feeling. Whatever they said, you could depend wasn't true. You could depend on that. What they were thinking, you could depend on that was not true. And when you were in Melfi's office and Tony said something that wasn't true, you knew he was lying, but you knew that you had seen the truth. I just like that, playing with that.
And finally, going back to that season 4 premiere where Christopher is led to the cop and he has him handcuffed in his living room and Magnum PI's on the TV. Barry Haydu says, I didn't do it. And Christopher says, honestly, it doesn't really matter because my boss wants you dead.
Right.
When you wrote that episode, did you give much thought to the truth of the situation, of what Tony had told Christopher?
I believe I did. I believe I knew he did. Yeah. Did I believe that Tony was being completely honest about every aspect? That would be unusual.
And finally, what for you was the most satisfying part of this whole experience of making this movie?
Looking at it, seeing other possibilities by shooting other things, seeing those things, putting them together, editing the film, putting the music on, all that post-production, and then finally going to see it in a great big theater at Warner Brothers, the Steve Ross Theater. It was a great, sound was great, the picture was great. It was a movie. It was not a TV show. It is not a TV show. It's a movie.
After all these years, you finally have made a Sopranos movie.
Yeah.
That's good. David, thank you very much.
Thank you.